好剑。
Hello, fellow procrastinators of the world. It's me. I'm back. But am I really back though? Because honestly, I was never really here in the first place. Oh well. You're probably here because you saw the title. Yes, we'll be painting WenZhou in a bit. Don't worry, we'll suffer together. Bear with me. But before that, if you want to skip this intro, you can go to this timestamp. So I finally watched Word of Honor, and honestly, I really liked it. I still feel giddy every time I think about it. They're so sticky, and for what? I'm especially drawn to Wenka, whose superpowers include having the nicest wardrobe out of any character from a live-action adaptation of a Chinese novel I've ever seen, as well as stalking. He is a stalker, right? Like, props to this man for seeing Joshua all drunk and dirty and going, "Hey, that man has nice shoulders. I'd tap that." Honestly, respect. Meanwhile, there's Joshua, whose superpower is getting nailed. Make of that what you will. My client for this commission, who inspired me to watch the show, was like, "Hey Hana," that's me by the way, I'm Hana. "Can you draw the sword scene from the show, but make it more kissy, if you will?" And I was like, bet. So I drew this, but it wasn't kissy enough. You know what I mean, right? So I drew this. Please take a good look at it because we won't be seeing it for a while. After that, it was only a matter of transferring my drawing onto my watercolor paper. For that, I used Arches 300 GSM 18 by 24 inches. It's rough and it feels like Pringles. For my watercolors, I just used a mixture of Holbein and Winsor & Newton. These are just colors that I like to use a lot in my paintings. For my brushes, I just use generic old brushes you can find in any bookstore or art supply store. They're cheap because I'm broke. Apologies in advance because I pronounced Wenki and Joshisho's names like 49 different ways throughout this entire video, none of which are correct. So if you're a native Chinese speaker and you want to help me with my pronunciation, please do. I need help. Also, if you want to watch the painting process on mute or at 2x speed, that's fine. I respect it. With that being said, let's go paint ourselves a pair of husbands. Okay, alright. First things first, here's me hesitating before I paint my first brushstroke. Please keep in mind how slowly I did that because that's how fast I paint realistically. I then sped up the clip 32 times because back in the newer version of the old Windows Movie Maker, you can only speed up using exponents of 2. Why? I don't know. The program just worked that way, okay? Are you with me? You're with me. Good. Let's begin. I started by coloring my base layers so that my colors would look rich and pretty afterwards. And as you can see, I struggled a lot because of gravity. The paint is just dripping downwards all the time. Now you might be thinking, Hana, if you hated gravity so much, why were you painting on an easel? Wouldn't it be easier if you just painted on a table? To which I'd answer, considering that this piece is quite big, if I painted on a table, my eyes would be quite far from the faces, which happen to be the most important parts of the drawing. And this would cause parallax distortion. Since this painting is meant to be mounted and framed, I thought that it would be best to constantly view it from the front while I'm working, which would be how my client would be looking at the painting most of the time. Think of it this way. Remember how sometimes you draw a figure, but when you look at the drawing upright, you find out that the head is far too big for the body, even though it looked okay when the drawing is laid flat on the table? That's what I'm trying to avoid. Also, painting on an easel is just better for my back. Something, I deal with gravity, but I paint a better face equivalent exchange. By adding more layers, I attempted to darken my values. The one thing that makes watercolor so finicky is that you can't really get dark colors from the get-go. If you used concentrated paint straight from the tube, that would make your colors dull upon drying, but also kind of shiny? That sounds weird. It's like the colors look unsaturated on the paper, but when you flash some light over it, it reflects the light. Does that explain it properly? Anyway, that's called bronzing. Even if you use the best studio-grade archival paint in the world, If you paint too thickly from the very beginning, you would lose so much of the chroma that's desirable in more expensive paints. On that note, watercolors aren't just about drawing the sketch and painting over it. If anything, I think the drying process is just as important. Most of wet watercolor techniques can be attributed to two things: fringing and back runs.
Back rolls.
Not back rolls, back runs. When pigments dry on the side, that's called fringing. And if you're a paint tool side user, there's actually a layer option that emulates that effect. You can try it out, it's so fun. And when colors bleed into each other, because you can't be bothered to wait for the paint to dry before coloring right next to it, that's called the back run. If you want to do gradients using watercolor, you do back runs. Just like what I'm doing with Ash's face in the footage. Those two are what makes watercolor look so wet. Depending on how used you are to controlling the water content on your brush, or how familiar you are with how surface tension works, yes, knowing how surface tension works helps with watercolors, you may do these techniques either accidentally or, if you're smart, on purpose. But watercolors are unique in the way that even the accidents you make would look artistic and beautiful. So if you're thinking about getting started with watercolors, then I say just go for it. It's a very forgiving medium. Mostly. Don't expect tutorials from me though. You're here to watch me make a fool out of myself, not to learn. So anyway, I made quick work of Josie Show's hair, making sure that I used a light blue before going in with a darker blue. I personally don't really use pure blacks in my paintings anymore. It's usually in combination with other colors because it just looks more interesting that way. And ooh, look at that dainty brush that I have. I like that brush so much. I bought it years ago, I think, back when I thought I could teach myself lettering, but it never really worked out because I'm lazy. But anyway, I was just painting at random. I wasn't really overthinking it since I was already using a masking fluid, and that took care of my highlights. Isn't it so nice to see how the colors get darker and darker, especially when sped up like this? Sometimes I wish I painted this fast in real life. That would make plate creation for my major subjects way faster. Also, the synthetic brush that I'm using, it's huge, but it gives me such nice stroke control. It's great. Remember folks, painting is already hard as it is. Don't torture yourself by using the wrong brush. Treat yourself. Buy brushes, except if they're too expensive. I'll show you what I mean later. Painting Wenkaxiang's hand was pretty much the same process. It's just the base layer that I continuously built up on before finally adding shadows with blue that would come later. Did you guys know that vermilion is my favorite shade of red? It's such a nice, vibrant red. So saturated, it almost looks like it's orange. It goes so well with turquoise and cerulean too. Who cares if it was originally toxic? Like, just look at it. It's so pretty. I guess historically, the brighter the pigment was, the more toxic it was, but don't quote me on that, I just made that up. Watching Wenkaxiang's hand take form is so satisfying to me. Like, I know I painted it, but I was doubting myself so much in the beginning because his fingers looked so much like sausages. And maybe they still do look like sausages, but they're finger-like sausages this time at least. Hands are weird. Every time I work on a painting, I always have to remind myself to trust the process because the key to successfully finishing a piece is usually just by getting past the ugly face. Sometimes getting past the ugly face takes hours. Sometimes it could even take days. All that matters is that you don't stop, etc., all that. Basically added the details on his nails and the wrinkly parts of his fingers once the paint underneath dried. It wasn't anything special. So, this is what we have so far. Not looking too shabby, I might say. I just got back from my uncle's 60th birthday party this morning. Oh my god, it's so windy. And I'm not gonna lie, having that one lapse in my painting process is really affecting my desire to get back to work. But I suppose it's just a matter of getting back into the flow state. By the way, a thing that happened the other day before I left for my uncle's birthday party was that because it's so windy here for some reason, the curtains knocked down my glass of painting water. So it just spilled water all over my palette. And I had to dry it by the window really quick. Also, I need to go back to school tomorrow. So I don't know if I'll get any work done on this today. Because I have homework that I haven't started on. Also, I think it's kind of funny how his hand looks like it's just floating in midair. See that splotch of paint in winky collar? It caused me a lot of grief because that part was supposed to be white and I couldn't lift the paint anymore, but that's what painting against gravity does for you. Alright, it's now time to paint the robes. So I just laid down a very subtle layer of a very diluted blue, waited for it to dry, and went to town with the folds. I'm actually not too good at painting folds with watercolors, so I just looked really closely at my reference photo, painted what I saw, and hope for the best. I'm not too fond of drawing clothes either. That's why I always just draw characters naked. Look at the number of layers this man has. Like, how do these people even do their laundry? Is winky's wardrobe so extensive because he can't be bothered to have his clothes washed, so whenever he gets dirt on them or something, he just discards them in favor of some new drip? Just rich people things. So if you're new to watercolors, the technique that I'm currently using in the footage is wet on dry, which just means that I am going over the first dry layer, aka the subtle light blue that I talked about earlier, with darker wet paint. Wet on dry allows me to add colors without reactivating or messing up the layers underneath.
If you're not new to watercolors, I'm sorry for over-explaining a concept that you already know.
That was just me sharing some of my lunch with winky. And here's me finally starting on WenZhou's robe. Considering that winky's robes were white, sort of white, silver, building up values was easy. WenZhou's robes, unfortunately, were a different story, and it low-key made me cry. By the way, you have probably noticed by now that my brush strokes are very splotchy upon drying. It's because that's just how I paint, and also because I am using rough watercolor paper. Remember how I said that the paper feels like Pringles to the touch? That's because the paper has a lot of grain, or tooth if you will. And this affects how watercolors dry. Rough paper is actually better suited for landscapes because it's prone to making watercolor fringe a lot upon drying, and this can yield beautiful abstract textures. Some artists would argue that this tendency to produce additional textures could distract from the features of the face when doing portraits. So if you're looking into buying watercolor paper for portraiture work, and you want a smoother finish, I'd recommend going for hot press watercolor paper instead. Fun fact, I was too lazy to record voiceover for this part, so I sped up the footage even more. After crying over the inordinate amount of paint I spent on WenZhou's robes, I went out of the house to meet up with my friend. We ate at my favorite Japanese restaurant. I made myself hungry while editing this footage. I looked at all of the books that I'm too broke to afford, and I watched as my friend won a very scuffed-looking key from a nearby claw machine. Oh, and we dropped by the art supply store.
Oh my God, art bar. Hindi, kasi nung pumunta ako dito, pinuntahan ko yun after nung 4-5 thing ko. Ayun pa rin siya ko. Wala, kasi mahal siya. Look at it. It's like $30 for a brush.
Hi, we have Shizun with us in the back. He's here to judge my life choices. Okay, so good morning. It is now a Saturday, which means I've been painting for about a week now because I have really poor time management. Now, the only thing that's left to do with this painting is to paint the solid dark blue that's in the background and also Ashu's sword, which I'll do in a bit. I hope that the blue background will fix my values because in real life this looks a bit darker than it should be. But that's probably because I painted on a stark white surface Normally, I would use a burnt sienna stain as a mid-tone, so I would be able to paint either more light or more dark instead of just, painting from light to dark as you do with watercolors. But we'll see, because if this ends up not working out, that would just mean that I spent a whole lot of paint and paper on nothing. And I don't want that. Art materials are expensive. They went ahead and painted Ash's sword. I don't remember why I procrastinated doing that for the longest time, and geez, man, look at that background though. That's what I get for being an impatient bitch. Anyway, so I tried layering my colors, as you do, and I finally started on the background. I soon realized that there's something wrong with the cheap brush that I got, so I cut off that one strand of hair before going back to work. At first, I tried being smart and wetting the paper surrounding my foreground in an attempt to get a flat wash and doing the tilty thing that you see professional painters do in an attempt to distribute my pigments better. But then I remembered that this is rough paper, so no matter what I do, it would not end up looking as flat as I wanted to anyway. A+ for effort. By the way, that was my cousin giving me my milk tea. She was holding some greens because she was about to feed her guinea pig at the time. And thus began the long, arduous process of layering my colors. It's satisfying to watch now, but let me tell you, watching all this color dry in real time was not entertaining. The next few seconds are just a constant cycle of me adding more layers and being frustrated. So instead of talking about that, I would like to talk about my painting table. If you're a Filipino, you've seen this folding table at least once in your life. It's sold in a lot of furniture stores. But if you're not Filipino, I can now be your Filipino friend who owns the table with the fake wood and metal legs. That's right, that wood is fake. It's printed on. It's not real pieces of wood. Oh, and another thing that I did was incorporate the colors of the background into winky's robes, because white is a reflective color, so it should reflect some of the light surrounding it. And also in their hair, because hair is shiny and is also reflective. I just did that, and then I did more of that. What else am I supposed to say? Oh, I gave up. I just gave up and busted out my Hime gouache because I couldn't be bothered anymore. and look at how dry that is. Jesus Christ. I don't take care of my gouache. I'm so sorry. That worked way better, actually, and way faster. So, woo! But it felt like cheating. Now, using the flat end of my brush, I rubbed off the dried up masking fluid to reveal the clean paper underneath. Masking fluid is great. It allows you to paint without overthinking your whites. By the way, I forgot to mention, but the reason why I switched angles from using my easel to laying my drawing flat on the table was because I didn't want gravity to interfere with my painting this time. Finally, all that's left are the finishing touches. So using white gouache, I just added more highlights. Normally, I'd use a white pen for this, or perhaps even white acrylic paint to make it look more opaque. But those all had a weird sheen to them upon drying, and I didn't want any weird sheens on my drawing. So I just used gouache. Also, gouache is erasable, because I'm scared of commitment. Doing hair details has always been my favorite part, so I'm just going to shut up now so we can all focus on my brushwork. Hey, editing Hana here. So as it turns out, watching this in real time was really boring. So I sped it up and we're already done. No obligatory montage here. Just, it's done. It's done. You're still here? Thank you for making it this far if you did. That's so sweet of you, honestly. I painted this, so I'm allowed to hold it this way. So first things first, we did it, and I'm going to show this to my client now. And if they don't like it, I'm gonna cry. Secondly, I just got back from a party and I'm really tired and I'm about to pass out. So I'm going to keep this very short. What did we learn today, kids? Don't buy expensive brushes. They're not worth it. Go use the money to treat yourself to good food or something. I don't know. Whatever floats your boat. Aside from that, I don't know if I'm going to make another video. Maybe I'll upload it in 3 months. Maybe I'll upload it in the next 3 years. Who knows? Subscribe if you want to find out. And on that note, if you want to catch more of my work, I'm very active on Twitter, and I also rant about art school a lot on Twitter. But I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, and Tumblr, so I'm all over the place, honestly. I'm barely touching grass. What do YouTubers even say? Like, comment, subscribe, share, all that stuff, and see you guys next time if I do happen to make another one. Good night!